Hey there guys, so I've been messing around with the M2 Air a bit more after essentially having to resort to installing Linux just to get this to be functional in any capacity. I did want to give Windows another shot, but obviously stock Windows 11 was not gonna do anything for us. But there was a version of Windows 11 that I did want to try, and that is Windows 11 IoT. Now, if you've never heard of the IoT version of Windows 11, it's essentially an extremely lightweight, super cut down version of Windows that is really meant for businesses. Essentially for any devices that need an operating system that has pretty much nothing on it. And for whatever reason, they aren't going to resort to using some Linux distro. And well, we'll see if this extremely debloated version of Windows is enough to make this ancient piece of garbage a viable computer. So let's jump right on in. So in the first boot up after installing Windows IoT, the thing that surprised me the most was that in Task Manager, the CPU wasn't at 100% utilization all the time. Now you do anything and it will spike up to 100%, but not all the time. Now I think this is pretty significant because we're talking about dual cores here. So the fact that there aren't 1,000 things running in the background that are constantly utilizing the full CPU is already a huge win. Windows is just such a bloated OS at this point that there are about 1,000 different things running in the background at all times. And while you might not notice that when you have a 16-core processor, when you only have 2 cores to deal with here and only 6 gigabytes of RAM to fit everything onto, suddenly not getting these gigantic spikes all the time or just seeing your full CPU getting utilized is such a huge win. I will say though that going through the entire Windows setup process on this system was kind of a huge pain, mostly down to the fact that there is no real driver page for this mini PC. You're not going to be able to go onto any website to download a driver package, and the only way I was able to really get all of the missing drivers was essentially going into Google and looking up the hardware ID of each missing thing and just downloading a random driver for them. Is it the safest thing to do? No, not really, but it's pretty much the only thing I could do to get all of this. Now, I wiped the original installation, so this is a problem that I'm going to have anytime I try to do anything with this system from now on. But if you, for whatever reason, bought this, as long as you don't wipe it, you won't really run into any issues. Unfortunately, I did still have to sit through about 45 minutes worth of Windows updates, and of course going through all the driver installations. So by the time I finished all of that, I was kind of just really excited to do literally anything with this computer. And of course, the very first thing that I did was I ran Cinebench R23, which was in a lot of ways kind of surprising to me, because when I first tried to launch this on Windows with the original installation, it just would refuse to open. It would just be loading in for so long, but nothing ever happened, and I can only assume that it was because the CPU was so overloaded, it pretty much never got around to actually opening the program. So the fact that I was able to open it and have it run was already kind of a win. And no matter what score it was going to get, I was just happy to get this far. That being said, it did produce the lowest score that I've ever seen on both the multi and single core scores in Cinebench R23. So all of this effort was worth it because it is record setting. That's the record for the worst product I've ever taken a look at, but it is a record. But really what I wanted to see was if Windows IoT could make this a far more functional computer, and by the looks of it, it did seem to have achieved something in that regard. While trying out YouTube on here, 480p up to 1080p playback pretty decently well. It's when going up to 1440p and 4K that we run into a lot of frame drop issues. But at 1080p, as long as you don't touch anything else on the computer, you just let the video play, it will play perfectly fine. And that's kind of a huge upgrade over where we were at before, where even 1080p was just unwatchable. Even going down to 480p would not get you a good result with the stock Windows setup. Of course, after the success of YouTube, I did want to give Plex a try to see if we could get this to be a decent enough experience, so I did download the Plex HTPC app. Now, for legal reasons, I can't show you this, but video playback, at least for a 1080p anime video, was perfectly fine. And all the testing that I did did, as long as I was watching content in 1080p or lower, it would play back perfectly fine. It was just 4K that gave me any kind of issues. So overall, not a bad result really. And of course, since I tried it on Linux, I also decided to use Moonlight with Windows here, and I did try it with 1440p at 144 Hz with a bitrate of 150, and it was a disaster. While it ran perfectly fine on my gaming PC, clearly the video playback here is just not going well. It kept saying it was a network-related issue, which is interesting because I didn't get any errors like that while using this with Linux. But even though the rendered frame rate here is significantly higher than it was in Linux, clearly there is severe stuttering happening that makes this unusable. Even dropping down the bitrate down to 40 and forcing it to use H.264 instead of H.265, nothing was really getting any good result out of this. It wasn't until I dropped down to 1080p and I locked it to 60 that we got an actual usable experience out of this. After running the benchmark multiple times here, there was never any stutters or anything that ever ended up happening. So 1080p 60 is doable here. It's just kind of disappointing since this is a 1440p display it's hooked up to, and the game itself is being rendered at 1440p. But considering from where we started, I'm just really surprised that we get anything even remotely close to a usable experience out of this little system. And although I don't really recommend this system at all to anybody or anything even remotely spec'd like this, it is kind of surprising how much performance you can get out of Windows if you just cut out all the crap. And it also does show that there's a lot of hardware out there that is not really obsolete, that people are kind of just throwing out. Because if you can do all of this stuff here with a dual core Celeron, you're telling me you can't do it with a quad core second generation Intel processor? Okay, well, that was surprising. I genuinely went into this expecting this thing to suck still. And don't get me wrong, it still sucks. It's not a great computer even with this version, but it was a lot more usable than I thought it would be. The fact that 1080p could be played on YouTube was kind of surprising. 1440p could work for a little bit, but it had a frequent enough stutter in the video playback that I would just say 1440p is out of the question. But as long as you don't touch anything else, you can watch YouTube 1080p on here, which is kind of impressive considering where we started. And I mean, the fact that it can also work as a Plex client is kind of impressive. I mean, it won't handle 4K video playback, but it can do 1080p, and that does mean that I can just transcode 4K video down to 1080p and it will work. It can just only do one thing decent enough at a time, which I guess is a win. I do think it's a win. It keeps it from being absolute e-waste to just probably should be e-waste. But this definitely isn't to say that this is a great experience, and I just don't recommend anybody buy this. But anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one.